technology works, right? Then DCI came out in September of this year and said, hey, we see lots of activity happening out there. We're going to write an addendum to the DCI spec where they essentially state that immersive sound shall be represented in a common format standardized by SMPTE that's interoperable. In March, DTS and Barco and Auro Technologies did join together to create a base for an open standard, which is created off of something called MDA, which is multidimensional audio. It's an object-based open source standard that we've incorporated into our production tools. So Auro can today actually produce channel-based as well as object-based soundtracks, but based on an MDA standard. But as I mentioned yesterday, if I get an email with the Atmos spec and the Atmos standard, I'm happy to support that as well. But in the end, whatever SMPTE standardizes on, that's what the industry will adopt. And it doesn't matter to me what foundation is used for that format. Some of the key benefits of interoperability, once we get to this open standard, are fairly self-explanatory. When you go in and start producing the schedule for the creation of these soundtracks, we have to minimize the time spent on the sound stages because production budgets for post-produced sound is not increasing. See, everything impacts the budget that these films have. So they need to arrive at a workflow that allows them to capitalize the most amount of deliverables, whether it's 5.1, 7.1, immersive sound, TV versions, airplane versions. They need a way to be able to create all these versions in a quick and cost-effective manner. So they can really get to this, mix the movie once and be able to play it anywhere in the derivative markets. So with that idea, the only sense that we can really do to make that work is to have a single file format available where all of the other soundtracks can be created from. The current channel-based Auro workflow accommodates that. The current Atmos workflow accommodates all of that, except for you can't get an Auro mix from an Atmos mix. So it's a matter of merging those two together in the standards process where you can get to that single inventory distribution. For the exhibitors, and the philosophy behind NATO and UNIC's letter was to create the freedom of choice for the exhibitors, because it's a basic concept that competition fosters economic viable business models. If there's a proprietary solution or only one player or a monopoly in the market, it's hard to arrive at a cost-competitive situation where things can be innovated at a cost-effective price point. So competition is healthy for the market. Another subject that comes up is the branding. A lot of theaters that are putting in immersive sound systems are putting them into premium screens. IMAX was a premium screen brand, or is a premium screen brand. But a lot of exhibitors are creating their own brands. In the US, you have Regal with RPX, Cinemark with XD, and you have other things like Ultra Screen and ScreenX, and everybody's trying to propel their own unique premium screen brand. And we see Auro as a technology that can be used to help that premium screen brand. The experience is what's important. Immersive sound is a big part of it, but believe it or not, if you poll the audience, one of the most important things that the audience wants are comfortable chairs. Cup holders big enough to hold my supersized, super gulp drink. And if the sound in the picture is great, that's good too. So all of these aspects together make a premium experience. And Auro is one of those components. And we don't force wide branding, but of course we will make one of these signs available to you, and you can put that in your lobby if you like. But it's really strengthening your experience that you can present to the audience. Recurring licensing fees and upgrade license fees. Now, as the first country in the world that went completely digital, Norway, I'm sure you're familiar with, well, maybe not. I'm sure when you went 100% digital, you thought, this is it, we're done, I don't have to upgrade systems anymore, it's all static. Well, of course, that didn't happen. I'm not sure how many upgrades have been applied to the DCI compliant systems over the years, but it's certainly not done when you just install the first version. And there is the possibility of anything that's software-based, like immersive sound renderers, that there will be upgrades. And we need a way to be able to protect to make sure that upgrades and improvements don't trap the exhibitors in any kind of a licensing fee scenario, where those expenditures could add up over time. And an open standard, of course, would resolve that. Competition also makes things adopt faster. The single format will allow a larger amount of titles to be produced. Therefore, you don't have to worry about the risk of a certain title being made in one format or the other. It really decides, the exhibitor has to make the choice on which experience they want to provide for their audience. Okay? So that's the goals of the interoperable open standard for immersive sound. As for Auro specifically, we have a very good relationship with DreamWorks Animation. Their next 15 films are being contractually obligated to be produced in Auro 11.1 and deployed worldwide. We also have great comments from people like Randy Tom and Matthew Wood. These are both guys that work up at Skywalker, some of the early people that we worked with the format on. And some of the comments they have here are all about making that immersive sound standard immersive without being distracting, making it smooth, making it easy to work with, being able to improve the experiencing, making it immersive without it being gimmicky. We're very conscious about the problem that we had with visual 3D, where you had fantastic movies like Avatar, where everybody said, "Oh God, that's the best looking 3D I've ever seen." And then, sometimes Hollywood does what it does and takes something that's really good, uses it too much, and abuses it, makes films like, I'm not going to say the name of the film, it wouldn't be politically correct, but there's films that are, let's say, not so good in 3D. We need to make sure that we don't do that with immersive sound. It's a tool that creatives can use to further enhance and tell their story. But we don't want to make it so much so that it's distracting. Another quote that we got from a random audience member after we did the turbo screening at Cine Europe in Barcelona was, "Hey, you've managed to make the sound system so much more enveloping and immersive without it hurting." I found this quote kind of interesting because there's lots of legislation going on around the world that are forcing exhibitors to continually turn down the volume of their cinemas. And if there's exhibitors in the room, you're probably doing the same thing most exhibitors do. If one person walks out of the auditorium and says, "That's just too damn loud," okay, sorry, sir, ma'am, we'll turn it down. But if there's two people that come out of the auditorium, there's never anybody that comes out, except me, that says, "Turn it up." So as a result, volumes are pretty much getting turned down for these experiences all over the world. And that would be okay if it wasn't for the fact that you can't hear how the film was intended to be shown. And what we found with 11.1 is because we're distributing the sound over a wider variety of sources, out of a wider variety of points around the room, that it's actually creating the perception of it not being as loud. And that's exactly what we were after when we designed the 11.1 layout, being able to stick with diffuse surround arrays and not having too much SPL coming from any one point. We wanted to be very conscious of the legislative matters that are going on around the world with regards to how loud a film can be presented. So far we've done 14 films this year, and for DreamWorks Animation, not only are the films released in their original version at 11.1, but they're contractually obligated to produce dubbed versions in Auro as well. So that means when any of these DreamWorks Animation features come up, they will be dubbed in Norwegian or Danish or whatever region around the world where there's an Auro system involved. The workflow to create an Auro encoded track that has the foreign language dub takes about 2 to 3 hours to create from a post-production perspective, so there's not a whole lot of cost involved, and it can be substituted for the 5.1 that goes out. So it's an easy process for films to comply to. Now, we have a lot of regional titles as well that have come out in this year. We have quite a few Hindi movies. There's some Asian movies over there with Mr. Go and the Stalingrad in Russia. We had an Auro print produced. Next year, these are the 3 films from DreamWorks Animation. Happy Smack Day, which comes out in December. How to Train Your Dragon 2, Peabody and Sherman. But we'll keep the list up to date on our website if you want to know what the upcoming releases are in Auro. And we'll see these dual inventory creations happening for about the next 12 to 18 months, however long it takes for the standardized format to become available. Some of these Asian titles, it's funny. There's the one back here with the hairy ape called Mr. Go. And just a quick story on that. It was a film produced by a company in China about a gorilla that plays baseball. And you would first think, wow, that sounds really entertaining, seeing a gorilla that plays baseball. But it was actually a pretty darn good film. I was surprised. It's the production value happening in China and Southeast Asia. It used to be when you watch some of these films from these regions, you would go, oh yeah, that was pretty. but it was the special effects were fantastic, the production value was fantastic, and there was actually a very good human element to some of these stories. And I sit there and I watch some of these films that we're doing in Auro out of these developing markets in Asia, and I think in the back of my mind, man, Hollywood better really watch out, because if they're not careful, these guys are going to start producing movies with just as good as special effects, maybe not the brand value that Transformers and some of the Marvel characters can have, but they have really good human elements, I think, just because of the culture of the territories they're produced in. So when you see some of these titles coming up in Asia, and then they're mixed in either Auro or Atmos, try to go out and take a look at them, because it's these foreign films are really, really something else. They're getting better and better, in my perspective. Right now we have 82 screens installed around the world. We have a pretty heavy concentration of screens in India, but in Scandinavia we only have 3 screens. They're all down in Denmark. We don't have any screens in Norway, so feel free to talk to Frederick or myself and try to find a way to correct that. Now we have signed commitments with Cinemark in the US for 157 screens, Regal for 20, so that puts our domestic screen count by next summer somewhere around the 150 to 200 mark, depending on how fastly these screens are deployed. And that, of course, will also help with the amount of content that's developed into the marketplace. Now, the Open Standard Initiative has a variety of things to it. The first step is getting this immersive audio master created. So this is the tool set that we use on the post-production stage to be able to create the open standard format. So if you can imagine on the left, these are individual track files. Each track could be the sound of a bird chirping, it could be a violin, it could be a piece of dialogue, but a given film could have 1,400 of these tracks. And the mixer will then designate which track should be part of the bed or an object. I'll get into the objects and beds in just a moment. But all of this information gets chunked into a computer. The computer then renders out all of the derivatives, whether it's a 5.1 version, a 7.1 version, an Auro encoded 5.1 version, or an object-based mix with beds. Okay. So the tool sets today function in this workflow, and there's a few facilities around the world that are testing this out already. But there's not devices that can play back the master. But this is the first step in the standards process, is creating tools that can actually produce the master. And then everybody goes out and tries to create reference renderers and such to be able to play them back. The way a DCP looks like when you get this object-based immersive standard on there is you have a series of beds. M&E is a common term that's flashed around the industry. It just stands for music and effects. Anything that's not an object that needs to be moved around the room is an static bed. Music is usually a static bed. Sometimes it does get moved around. Some ambience are static, and some dialogue elements are static. So you have these beds sitting there, and then you have another track file that points to all these objects. And these objects will sit on the server. They'll get pulled out into the sound processor. The sound processor combines them, and out it gets fed into the auditorium. But on the DCP, you'll still have the standard 5.1. You'll still have the standard 7.1. But we want to get to a standard for immersive sound, or whatever the industry decides to coin the term. There seems to be a big argument about that. That might be a question for later that maybe Stuart and I can... Is it immersive sound? Is it multi-channel sound? Is it Bob sound? Is it... We've been using immersive sound, but there seems to be quite a debate. Maybe there's a good Norwegian word for immersive that we can just substitute to make everybody shut up. Our upgrade process in the field to support the open standard is the AP24. It's what we use all over the world that does the basic B-chain processing. And we add a card to that unit, which is essentially a render. That's the card that we'll add to the back of it to take all the information in from the server with the objects, combine it over top of the beds, and send it out to the Auro configured speaker layout in the auditorium.